Hello, my name's Christopher Balmford. I come from Melbourne, Australia. I used to be a lawyer, very active these days in the plain language world, but it wasn't always like that. I used to work for the Law Reform Commission of Victoria, which was a government body set up to suggest changes to the law to the government. And one of the topics that the government asked the Commission to tell the government about was about plain language, about making legal documents and legislation and contracts and insurance policies easier to understand. And I wasn't working on that project, my colleagues were. I was working on another project. And we often reviewed each other's documents and talked about the work we were doing together. And I argued against them, and I said that it couldn't be done. That legal documents to be clear and accurate and plain on the one hand, if you achieved that, then you would lose the accuracy, the certainty and the precision. These two things were mutually incompatible, I argued. I lost that argument. It became very clear to me as I debated with my colleagues that they were right and that I was wrong. They did two tremendous things. They wrote a legal analytical argument about plain language, showing why it was valid. Just as importantly, they produced demonstration rewrites. And on the left-hand side of the page, they had the original text, say of a contract or a piece of legislation. And on the right-hand side of the page in a book, they had the rewrite. And because I was a doubter and I didn't believe in plain language, they got me to review their rewrites. And I'd been a lawyer for 5 years and I was quite, good at understanding contracts. And I would go through checking very carefully the original and making sure that it worked in the rewrite. And sometimes I found mistakes or little bits that they'd left out, and I thought I was very clever. But then they would fix it very quickly, because they would say, yes, we see the point you're making, thank you for making that, drawing that to our attention, and then they would fix it. So through this experience, I realised that I was wrong and that plain language could be clear and easier to understand and accurate, certain and precise at the same time. So this was my formative moment for my career that has now been in plain language, the plain language world 30 years. And I worked at the Commission in a plain language role after a while, and various organisations came to the Commission saying, we've seen the demonstration rewrites that you do, where the two documents on both sides of the page. We would like our insurance policy, was the first client that we had. And we would like our insurance policy to be as clear as the documents the Commission rewrites. And so I was reassigned within the Commission to basically provide a service to these clients. And some of them said, we can't find any lawyers elsewhere who are prepared to do it for us. And they said, you don't have to sign off the legal accuracy, certainty and precision. You're not responsible for that. We will get our own lawyers, our internal lawyers and the big law firm that acted for the insurance company. We will get them to sign it off. So that was a great relief for me. It meant that I could go as hard as I could at trying to make the document clear. Also at the same time, as hard as I could, making sure I had it accurate, certain and precise. But then it would go to the lawyers, either in-house at the insurance company or external. And then we would work together in the same way as I worked together with my colleagues at the Commission, where they would review the draft and say, oh, you missed this bit, or you didn't understand this bit, or sometimes they'd say, what we had in the document wasn't very good, we can see why you think it meant that, but actually what we meant it to mean was this. So we'd work together to fix it. So I did that for a few years at the Law Reform Commission, and then I went out on my own. Well, first I was seconded to a law firm in Australia to set up a plain language department and run training for its people and provide services to its clients and help it work on its precedent documents to make the great big library of documents that law firms have to cater for all the situations they need. There were people working on that and I was helping them. Then I was seconded to a financial services organisation in Sydney and I moved there with my family. And I was in-house there for 2.5 years. Then I went out on my own and set up a little plain language consultancy business called Words and Beyond and ran a plain language training course 500 times. Went a little bit mad with it, but had a lot of fun. And my colleagues have now run it another, between them, 700 or 800 or 900 times. One person has done it another 500 times. And it's been wonderful seeing the change over the years as the world has, at least in Australia and to some extent in other places, has increasingly accepted plain language as being valid and reliable and enabling people to make informed, confident decisions about their businesses and their lives and their work and their families and their health and everything else they need to make decisions about. And at the same time, plain language helps make business and government and every organisation more efficient because people can understand what they're meant to do. They don't ring up with queries, they don't ignore the document. They're much more likely to do what they need to do. And that's whether they're a consumer sitting at the kitchen table or whether there's someone at their desk in a work, whether that's someone in a junior job or someone in a very senior job. They do much better if they understand the documents. The second thing you asked me to talk about was plain language in Australia, and the work of the Law Reform Commission has caused a great big change in Australia. There would be lawyers saying it couldn't be done, and gradually the opponents of plain language fell silent, and then law firms, more and more law firms wanted plain language expertise. They hired plain language people, they trained their staff, and not every law firm did it, but all of the big law firms, I'm sure, have a plain language policy where they set out that they want to write in plain language. Some of them do it very well, some of them don't do it as well as others. But that's been the big change that's happened in Australia. It's the law firms leading with plain language. I said years ago, today clients are starting to be prepared to pay for legal documents that are plain. One day they won't pay for legal documents that aren't plain. And I think that's true. Gradually, clients are saying this isn't good enough, we need these documents to be plainer. So that's the thing that's really happened in Australia, is a broad universal acceptance of clearer documents. So the third thing that you asked me to talk about is the journey to getting a plain language standard, in particular part 1 of the plain language standard that was published in 2023. That was a very exciting day. The journey to ISO publishing its plain language standard in 2023 began in 2007 when the three major plain language organisations, Clarity, which is an international organisation that has a focus on legal documents. I used to be the president of Clarity, reflecting my legal interest. So that organisation. A second one called Plain, which is another international organisation, and it doesn't have a focus on anything particular. It's very broadly interested in all things plain language. And there's a third organisation called the Centre for Plain Language, which is based in the US, but it's Canada and a bit of Mexico. It's active in Canada and Mexico as well. And it has a broad focus on plain language with perhaps a little bit of a focus on government communications. So these three organisations were all friends. Clarity used to hold a conference one year, Plain would hold a conference the next year, so we'd rotate like that. And this is in 2007 and before, we'd be sitting around at a conference and someone would say, do you think we could ever get a standard for plain language? And someone else would say, well, maybe, but first we'd need a definition. And everybody would say, oh yeah, that's true. If we wanted to have a standard, we'd need an agreed definition. And then someone would say, and maybe if we got a definition and a standard, maybe we would also be able to get certification for organisations that they have a plain language culture, for individuals that they write in plain language, maybe for training courses that they're really good training courses about how to write in plain language. Maybe we could even certify this document is in plain language. These conversations went round and round for several years. And then finally in 2007 at a conference in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, the three organisations and another person, an independent person, did a panel session at a plenary session at the conference saying the three organisations should come together and form an organisation to do these things, to get a agreed definition, to get a standard, to do something about certification, to continue to advocate for plain language, to do research for plain language, to sort of review training and try and make it better. And in 2010, the three organisations published in the Clarity Journal, the journal, they published a paper called the Options Paper, which was what the three organisations might do together. And it's taken a long time, but the process, the three organisations formed an organisation that's now called the International Plain Language Federation. And the Federation worked with the three organisations to propose a definition of plain language. And the definition of plain language was adopted at a conference in Antwerp in, I think it was about 2012. I'm not absolutely sure of the year. But it was after discussing the definition at various conferences in various sessions with lots of people submitting comments, they agreed on definition of plain language. Having done that, the Federation then set out to develop a standard, and I was appointed the chair of the Standards Committee. And we didn't really know what we were doing, to be fair. But I contacted Standards Australia, and they were open to having a meeting with me. And I went and met them, and it was a very nice meeting. The person was very helpful and very supportive. The two things that he said most importantly were, you shouldn't do it, it's too hard. And the second thing he said was, you shouldn't do it, it takes too long. And he was 95% right about both of those things. It really was very hard, and it really did take a long time. And a lot of people contributed, including Machiko, right here in Japan, who was on the drafting committee for part 1 of the standard. So, because we were sort of naive and confident, and because there were a lot of us who thought it would be a good thing to do, we made a proposal to Standards Australia that it develop a plain language standard. And I should tell you a little thing here. You can get an international standard that covers the world in two ways. The first way is that one national standards body, like the Japanese Technical Standards Commission, I think it's called, or Standards Australia, can write a standard and develop a standard and publish it. Then it goes to ISO and says, we did this standard, we think it's really good, you should consider adopting it globally. That's one way. The second way is you can go through a body like Standards Australia or the Japanese standards body to get to ISO and say, this should be done internationally from the start. We very much, in the plain language world, we very much wanted to do that because we wanted to have part 1 of the standard work in many, if not all, languages, and I'm happy to say that it does. I'll leave that bit out. So we made this proposal to Standards Australia, and the person there was remarkably, brilliantly supportive, and she got us on the agenda at a conference in Ottawa, the same conference that we're here in Japan about, sorry, not conference, the same annual meeting of Technical Committee 37. We're here today in Takamatsu in Japan. In 2018, it was in Ottawa, Canada, and at that annual meeting, on behalf of Standards Australia, I made a proposal that there be a plain language standard. It's important to understand that I didn't do it on my behalf, and I didn't do it on the Plain Language Federation's behalf. I did it on behalf of Standards Australia. So we were inside the ISO world. I was accompanied to the annual meeting by Annetta Cheek, who was the president of the International Plain Language Federation. And between us, we were there for quite a few days. And then Technical Committee 37 said, okay, yes, we think we'll do this. We support it going to a vote of the national standards bodies that are members of, like Standards Australia, that are members of Technical Committee 37. There's then a 3-month voting period where all of the national standards bodies think, do we want to do this? Do we have the resources to do this? Does our country need this? And then at the end of that 3-month period of thinking about it, there's a very formal vote. Each national standards body gets 1 vote. And I'm delighted to say that it was approved. And then the real work began, and Technical Committee 37 set up a little working group called Working Group 11, which I'm on and Machiko is on and various other people are on. And it formed a drafting committee that worked incredibly hard to write part 1 of the standard. An example of how hard they worked is when the drafts are prepared and all the national standards bodies comment on the draft, the drafting committee has to respond to every comment quite in detail. They have to explain why they adopted it or why they didn't adopt it. And the drafting committee, in this case, in a 30-day period, they met 15 times for 2 hours. And it was only just before Christmas, when we're all too busy anyway to think about these things. They worked very hard indeed. So now we have part 1, which is tremendously exciting, and part 2 on legal writing is coming, and part 3 on science writing is coming, and another part 4 on how an organisation can certify that its people write in plain language. That's being prepared as well. These things are all very exciting for plain language, and it's a long, long way from 2007 when we wondered whether maybe we should try and get a definition and a standard and certification. And the Federation is now working on developing certification, but that's another story, and it's part of tomorrow.